Shadows became life. Ignorance fueled strife. When all I had was sin, you still took me in. You showered me with peace, gave me room to breathe. You are a prince, a friend to me, and I will stand in awe of your love. The title for your grace is amazing. Now I walk and we talk, still amazed to be with you. You cleared away my sin. There's harmony within. Spirit moves my feet, I will follow after thee. Look where I stand, in the presence of I am, and I will stand in awe of your love. The title for your grace is amazing. And I will stand in awe of your love. The title for your grace is amazing, so amazing. Spirit moves my feet, I will follow after thee. Look where I stand, in the presence of I am. Your spirit moves my feet, I will follow after thee. Look where I stand, in the presence of I am, yeah. And I will stand in awe of your love. Oh, the title for your grace is amazing. The title for your grace is amazing. It's amazing. It's amazing. It's amazing. The title for your grace is amazing. It's amazing.
Hello and welcome to Kingdom of Context. Thanks for joining us here tonight, guys. We are going to have a call-in show, so you can use the link in the video description or in the live chat, and you can call in and address this topic. So what I wanted to put forward tonight is that Abraham did the same commandments as Moses, as Jesus, as James, Peter, John, all the disciples, including Paul. And these are the same commandments that are required of all mankind for discipleship to God. If you have faith in Christ, you are of the faith of Abraham. You should do the same behavior as Abraham, just like you should do the same behavior as Christ. And we're going to just touch on some of the aspects of Abraham's life and look at some of the things he did and said and how he was commended for doing the commandments of God. And so if you disagree, if you think that that was somehow, an oral Torah that wasn't written down yet, if it was somehow just for them Jews, and you don't think that any of that applies to you today, you're welcome to call in. We can have a quick talk about it, and hopefully I will willing set you straight as kindly and lovingly as possible. Because we don't want your faith in Christ to be ineffective or unproductive. No, we want you to increase in these wonderful things of discipleship so that you are effective and productive for Christ Jesus. I don't want you out there running around saying oxymoronic concepts. So you're welcome to call in, guys. Let's look at some things real quick. Real quick, though, we do want to say a big shout out and prayer to those who are battling fires right now. In Colorado, a lot of people are being threatened with that. There's some heavy fires going on. They've even found news has even come out about the police catching people trying to start fires intentionally. So that's always kind of been like a suspected thing during quote unquote fire season. Seems to always pop up during the summer. And some people say, oh, it's just because it's dry, didn't have enough snow, didn't have enough, oh, there's lightning hit a tree, but yeah, they're actually catching people trying to instigate. So either way, just pray that the Father would either send rain, help the firefighters get these things under control, and keep people as safe as possible. All right. And look, I think that we should be international prayer people if possible. So, at the same time, if while you're praying, go ahead and say a prayer for all those affected in Venezuela. Go and pray for all those being affected by the aggression that we see in the Middle East towards Gaza and Lebanon and other places. And just pray that the Father would protect the innocent as much as possible, that he would weaken the hand of the aggressor and the plans that are not of him. All right, guys, let us look at some stuff. Let's go into these scriptures. This is what's important. Let's get in these scriptures, huh? Abraham. So Genesis 12 is our first introduction. Well, we get him in chapter 11, but as far as like his storyline, really picks up in chapter 12. For chapter 11 just shows him from the genealogical standpoint, like who his forefathers were. But in chapter 12, we have this concept of Yahweh speaking to Abraham, leave your country, your kindred, your father's household, go to the land I'm going to show you. Okay. Put in live chat, guys. How do you think this happened? Was this just a dream? Was this just like a really pertinent dream that he had that just was like, oh man, Sarah, I had the craziest dream last night. I dreamt that we were supposed to leave Chaldea. I was supposed to leave my father's house, completely defect from this whole country, change religions. And boy, that was a strong dream. I think I'm going to do it. What do you guys think? Put in the live chat, guys. How did the word of the Lord, now this doesn't technically even say the word, but how do you think Yahweh communicated this to Abraham? Was it a dream? Was it a vision? Was it a stranger showing up in his door saying, behold, I'm a prophet from a land you've never been to, from a people group that you're unaware of. Go ahead and believe my words to you, that Yahweh, my God, is, in spite of all the gods of Babylon that your father is an idol maker for. In fact, I want you, in my opinion, even though you don't know me, don't trust me, don't have a reason to trust me, I want you to follow my words, leave your land, because this is the word of the God I serve. Do you guys think that's how it happened? You guys think an angel showed up? I appreciate that, Christ World Order Official. I appreciate you. Thank you for your support. Yes. So if you read the companion to Genesis, which is the little Genesis, also called the Apocalypse of Moses, or also called Leptogenesis in the Latin, also referred to as Jubilees by its most common name, you're going to find out that angels visited Abraham often. This is why by the time you get to chapter 18, it's not a big deal. And he knows who's approaching him. Okay. Some people try to say, well, Genesis 18, those weren't angels. Those were just men. Look, it says, the Lord appeared to Abram by the oaks, and the meat hid the day, was standing by the entrance of the tent, looked up, and he saw three men standing by. But yet angels appear as men all the time. And we're even told later that two of these visitors, they go on down to, when the men got up to leave, they looked over Sodom, and Abraham walked along with them to see them off. Two of the men turned away toward Sodom, and Abraham remained standing before Yahweh. So one of the men stayed, because remember, 3 men total showed up. Okay. 2 of the men are now leaving to go down the hillside towards Sodom and the other cities of the 5 cities of that region. And then once we see that story, it says, now the 2 angels arrived at Sodom in the evening. So they had actually, it qualifies later on in the chapter that these are actual angels that are referred to as men in chapter 18. And so this is why it's so important to understand that angels were visiting people often, specifically Abraham, because he was a righteous man. They're visiting people often. And angels is not an uncommon thing. In fact, Jubilees even explains to you, I think it's chapter 16, how the moment of, actually right here, the moment of Isaac on Mount Moriah, that this angel of the Lord that called out to him from heaven, he's the one narrating in Jubilees chapter 16, explaining how this whole thing was set up with Abraham, with Isaac, and how it was actually just very similar to the story of Job in Job 1 and 2, where Satan basically says, I want to test Job. In the same way, Jubilee 16, as narrated by this particular angel here, says Satan also wanted to tempt Abraham. And so at this moment on Mount Moriah, both Satan was there and this angel was there. And Satan was ashamed and humiliated because Abraham proved himself faithful and was about to go through with it. So this is where it's an important aspect of context to understand that, this is a constant, like this is literally the job of angels, is that they're ministering servants sent to those who inheriting salvation, Hebrews 1:14. And then that tells us a lot. It tells us that men like Abraham, who was a prophet, it was important that they rightly understood the word of the Lord and heard from the word of the Lord. So this is where even Abimelech, the king of Egypt, calls Abraham a prophet in Genesis 20, verse 7. Okay, this is important. They knew what he was. They knew he had a reliable word from Yahweh. And now, how does a prophet of old reliably know Yahweh speaking to him? An angel shows up and literally has a conversation with him, just like you see the precedent set in Genesis 18. That was not an uncommon idea. And this is why it was even in Genesis 18, that says will return to you. And the angels say they're going to return to him because she was going to be pregnant, at this point next year. And then Jubilee 16 and 17 has that same story and does say the angels returned. And then that's how they knew she was pregnant. And, her laughter was kind of a point of humbling for her because she realized God was able to do this, and that they decided to call Isaac Laughter based off of literally off of Sarah laughing at the thought of her becoming pregnant at 90 years old. So this was the whole story lends upon Abraham being a righteous man that God could trust with angelic visitations. And as we see here in chapter 18, the moment this happens, he saw them, he ran from the entrance of his tent to meet them and bowed low to the ground. He knew what he was looking at. This wasn't strange. Oh, hey, there's three door-to-door salesmen coming up selling some ancient pottery. It's like ancient Tupperware. Yeah, they're selling me some ancient essential oils. No, this is literally, he knew, oh, I'm looking at angelic visitation. And he bowed. This is obeisance. He bowed in reverence appropriately. So we go to chapter 14. Now, this is an interesting concept with the War of the Kings. This is the days of Amraphel. There are some ancient texts that tell you that this was directly Nimrod. And some people contest it, but that seems to be one of his ancient names. It's interesting. But remember, this is Babylon, Shinar, the plains of Shinar where Babylon was built. So Amraphel, king of Shinar, some people believe this was still during the reign of the ancient Nimrod. Okay. And that he is inciting these other kings to go and make war against these 5 different kings, 4 on 5. So the latter 5 came as allies to the valley of Siddim. For 12 years, they've been subject to Kedorlaomer, but in the 13th year, they rebelled. So they're already these five kings are already paying tribute to Chedorlaomer. All right. And in the 14th year, Chedorlaomer and his kings allied with him went out to defeat the Rephites and Ashtaroth Karnaim and Zuzites and Ham, Emites and Shavath Karathaim and the Horites in the Mount of Seir, in the area of Mount Seir, as far as El Paran, which is near the desert. So what's interesting here is this actual war, you don't get a lot of other explanation. Even in the book of Jubilees, there's not a lot of other explanation. But there is a unique book that's found amongst the Dead Sea Scrolls that is either, sometimes it's labeled as the Genesis Apocryphon, other times it's labeled as the Tales of the Patriarchs. And this was a book that was spoken about as what was considered outside book or an apocryphal book to the Old Testament, even as far back as the 7th century, and different canons in the 7th century within the Greek church. And so the Tales of the Patriarchs, let me pull this up for us. We'll read from a little bit. It gives us a little bit extra fun information. Let's make it bigger so we can read it a little bit. Okay. So this starts, it's following the course of Abraham's life for a good portion of this. Okay. It's talking about when he built the altar at Bethel, it's chapter 13, I believe. And then he goes into the Egyptian court. The advisors of Pharaoh of Zoan came, having heard the words of my wife. They brought gifts and requested knowledge from me. I read to them the book of the words of Enoch. Now, this is also consistent with the book of Jubilees, chapter 21, where it says Abraham had possession of the words of Noah and Enoch and read from them and learned his priestly duties from them. The men returned to Pharaoh, described Sarah's features. Now, this is where we see in chapter 20, the beautiful face, supple hair, lovely, pleasant eyes. Okay, so just to get you an idea of this is like Abraham being in the mix. This is the story of Abraham. And then at one point down here, because it's all fragments, guys, this is not a complete book that they found with the Dead Sea Scrolls, it's fragments. But at one point in the fragmented area, it talks about the Genesis 14 river, Battle of the Nine Kings, as you see right here. Okay, so let's go up here. It says, we'll start verse 29. It says, then I, Abraham, went out traveling in a circuit to survey the land. Okay, so this is actually fascinating because I've actually thought about this while reading Genesis, when it says, arise, lift up your eyes, and go and look, go to the east, west, north, south, walk the land that I want to give you as an inheritance. And I always thought to myself, wow, that seems like it's kind of like skipping over, like, did Abraham actually go walk the land? Because when you really learn what was he being promised, like, that's a big journey. Like, that could have taken him a year to walk this land, if not longer. And depends on how often he stopped, I should say. Definitely took him half a year. But it's interesting because it doesn't really say that in Genesis. It just says Yahweh telling him to walk the land, to survey it. This will be the land that you'll inherit it. But the Tales of Patriarchs, also Genesis Apocryphon, it literally claims that he did walk the land. And it goes and it tries to give you some of the ideas here. So before we go into the Battle of the Nine Kings, I think this is interesting. Hopefully you guys will be blessed by this. But God came to me in a dream and said, get up to Ramat Hazar, which is north of Bethel, the place you're living now. Look to the east, west, south, and to the north. Look at the land which I'm giving you and your descendants forever. The next morning I went up to Ramat Hazor, looked at the land from that height, from the river of Egypt to Lebanon, and from Sinir, from the great sea up to Haran, all the land of Gebel to Kadesh, and all the great desert, as far as the Euphrates. And he said to me, I shall give this land to your descendants, and they'll inherit it forever. I'll multiply your descendants like the dust of the earth that no one can count. Your descendants will be numberless. Arise, go walk about, see how long and how wide it is, for I will give it to you and your descendants after you forever. So then I, Abraham, went traveling in a circuit to survey the land. A circuit means you come back to the place you started. Okay. I began the circuit at the Gihon River. I went along the Mediterranean Sea until I reached the mountain of the Bull. I circled from the coast of this great river, saltwater sea, skirting the mountain of the Bull. By the way, this is Mount Zephon in the Syrian border. It's north of Israel today. It's in the ancient world. It was considered like a Canaanite stronghold for Baal worship. It's called Mount Zephon. In fact, we can even show you some pictures of it here in a minute. And then I continued eastward through the breadth of, it's kind of fragmented there, until I came to the Euphrates River. So we know he's going from the Mediterranean to the Euphrates. But he started at the Gihon River, and some people believe this is some people believe this is a river that's it basically is near. It's underneath Jerusalem. So I believe it was Hezekiah that talks about a underneath channelway that he dug and built according to the Gihon River because of the Assyrian invasion. They were running a water supply, but so anyway, the point is, people think that the Gihon River is like in. They think it's in like Philippines or whatever. I don't think it is, guys. I think it's literally closer to Jerusalem area. So nearby where he was staying near the Hebron area anyway. So, and rivers can change over time, depending on earthquakes and a whole bunch of other factors. They can change over time. But he began the circuit there. He went to the Mediterranean Sea. So that means he's going west a little bit. Then he goes north up the Mediterranean Sea, most likely towards what we would call Lebanon today, and then over to the Mount of the Bull, which is what we call Syria today, and then on over to the Euphrates River. And I circled from the coast of this great river, saltwater sea, skirting the mountain of the Bull, and I continued eastward the breadth of there until I came to the Euphrates River. I traveled along the Euphrates until I reached the Red Sea in the east, whence I followed the coast of the Red Sea. I came to the branch of the Reed Sea, jutting out from the Red Sea. And from there I completed the circuit, moving southward to arrive at the Gihon River. Then I returned home safely and found all as well with my men. Then I went and settled to the next to the Oaks of Mamre, which is northeast of Hebron. There I built an altar and offered up burnt offerings and a cereal offering to the God Most High. Okay, so he did what? He did a burnt offering and a cereal offering. That's a grain offering. Well, wait a minute. That's in Leviticus. That's a Thanksgiving offering. Whoa, and a burnt offering. That's for atonement. He's building altars and doing the same offerings we see listed out in Leviticus. Interesting. I ate and I drank there, and all the men of my household, and I invited Mamre, Arnom, Eshcol, 3 Amorite brothers, and my friends. They ate and drank together with me. Prior to those days, Kedorlaomer, the king of Elam, Amraphel, the king of Babylon, Arioch, the king of Cappadocia, and Tidal, the king of Goim, which lies between 2 rivers, had come. They waged war on Bera, the king of Sodom, Bersha, the king of Gomorrah, Shinab, the king of Admah, Shemiabad, the king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela. All these formed an alliance to do battle in the valley of Siddim. Now the king of Elam and the kings with him proved to be stronger than the king of Sodom and imposed tribute upon them. Over 12 years, they continued paying their tribute to the king of Elam, but in the 13th, they rebelled against him. Thus, the 14th year of Elam sallied forth with all his allies, and they ascended by the way of the desert. They smote and plundered beginning from the Euphrates. And they kept on smiting the Rephaim, who were in the Ashtaroth Karnaim. So do you guys remember when we're in Deuteronomy later, and it says these were the last descendants of the Rephaim? Interesting, huh? There were a lot more Rephaim, but they're destroyed by other kings of the time, whom some people would say were also had giants amongst their midst. But the Rephaim was a name for a specific clan. The Zemzumim and the Amim, the Emim, these were in the Sheva Hakiroth, and the Horites who were in the mountain of Gebal until they reached Al Paran in the desert. Sounds very much like Genesis 14, like we just read. They returned in Hazazon Tamar. The king of Sodom went out to meet him together with the king of Gomorrah, Adamon, Zeboim, and the king of Bela. They engaged in battle in the valley of Siddim against Kedorlaomer and allies that were with him. The king of Siddim was defeated and put to flight, while the king of Gomorrah fell into the pits. The king Elam plundered all the property of Sodom and Gomorrah, and they captured Lot. Okay. So, and then that's the end of that part. So what's fascinating about this is that it gives you a little bit more clarity. It does say that Amraphel was the king of Babylon. It also explains to you that Abraham is doing priestly duties according to the same instructions we see in Leviticus for sacrifices and altars. He's also given a promise of the kingdom come. Him and his descendants will live in this land forever. That, as we've taught for years, from Genesis, that assumes that assumes the resurrection at the end of the age, at the second coming of Christ. It assumes resurrection. Okay, that's how you live somewhere forever and are given something as an inheritance. So it's a beautiful thing to know and understand. So there's a lot of good, interesting information here. Same thing with him rallying the troops and going to take back Lot, who was kidnapped, as we just read. Let's go back to this. So So we see that Lot's kidnapped. Okay. Genesis 14:10, the valley of Sodom was full of tar pits. As the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled, some men fell into the pits, but the survivors fled to the hill country. The four kings seized all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their food. They went on their way. They also carried off Abraham's nephew Lot and his possessions, since Lot was living in Sodom. Then an escapee came and reported this to Abram the Hebrew. Now Abram was living near the oaks of Mamre, the Amorite, the brother Eshcol and Aner, all who were bound by treaty to Abraham. And when Abraham heard that his relative had been captured, he mobilized the 318 trained men born in his household, and they set out in pursuit as far as Dan. By the way, guys, a lot of people say, wait a minute, Dan, just in case you've never noticed this before, this is what's called an anachronism. Okay. So the son of Jacob, called Dan, hasn't been born yet. So why is 1 Enoch chapter 14 and Genesis 14 speaking about a land called Dan? 1 Enoch 14 speaks about the angels who rebelled against Yahweh and took wives and had children through the Nephilim, who became the Nephilim. Though he says that when Enoch pronounced their judgment against them, these rebellious angels, they cried next to the waters in the land of Dan, next to the river and the waters in the land of Dan. A lot of people say, oh, look, that proves 1 Enoch is fake. It proves it was written during Hellenized Second Temple period. These are some cliche terms and catchwords that you hear often. Oh, see, look, it's an anachronism. The land of Dan wasn't established yet. This is a common scribal concept, and there's a ton of these moments in the book of Genesis. Here's just one of them. Okay. So this is kind of an important thing to realize. As scribes copy these manuscripts over time, yes, they often put in modern names for geographical locations or cities and not the ancient name. They would put in the modern name so you could have a bearing in your mind of like where this is taking place, because a lot of people didn't know where they didn't either know the ancient name of the land before it became what they knew it as in that modern day, or they knew the readers wouldn't know. So this is important that we understand that there are lots of anachronisms in the book of Genesis, by the way. It doesn't mean that it was only written in the 2nd century BC as a Hellenized, Jewish Second Temple text, right? To somehow discredit it. No, we believe Genesis is scripture, just like we do 1 Enoch. And we understand from the scholarly concept of anachronisms and how scribes would put anachronisms in the text as far as their ementation to bring it into the relevancy to a modern audience in their day. It doesn't change the story. It's just a modern name for a geographical location or city that the people reading it in that day could relate to and understand. So what does Abraham do? He shows his faith to Yahweh. Kidnapping someone is a capital offense, punishable by death. Okay. And Abraham takes that seriously as someone who's not only is trying to save a righteous man, Lot, or whom, we have Hebrews 11 calls Lot a righteous man, or is it James 5? Either way, Abraham is going to go save Lot from Chedorlaomer, basically be in the spoils of this war. And he decides, all right, he gets his forces together and he routs Chedorlaomer's army, pursuing them as far as Hobah, north of Damascus, the land of Dan. So this is important. He retrieved all the goods as well as his relative Lot and his possessions, together with women and the rest of the people. It's kind of an important concept. Now, Abraham returned from defeating Chedorlaomer, and the kings allied with him. The king of Sodom went out to meet with him in the valley of Shavah. That's the king's valley. Then Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was, since he was priest of God Most High, and he blessed Abraham and said, now this blessing, by the way, it's just my opinion. Okay. But this blessing, it's interesting that he receives a blessing just like it. This is also, parroted in Jubilee, is also called the Little Genesis in chapter 13, I believe. And there's more than just one priest there in Jubilees. There's like a whole order. It's the order of Melchizedek. So it's the priest of God Most High, who would be the high priest over other priests. So his lesser priests are with him, and they eat of the tithe that Abraham gives at this moment. But the blessing to Abraham, and this is just my speculation. Okay, I want to make this very clear. The blessing given to Abraham at this point, I feel like, is in some way like inducting him into a higher level of his priesthood, because he is given it's just, he already has people under his control. He would technically already be like a Melchizedek, but I could be wrong. It's just interesting that he is clearly subservient to this particular priest in this moment, but then later on in Abraham's life, we see him become a priest over many peoples and is commended by God for doing all the commandment, statute, ordinances of Yahweh. And because that was a part of his faith, that was how he walked out practically the promises that he was receiving, to say, oh, look at the land. I'm going to give you all this land forever. He's justified for believing his descendants would be as numerous as stars, and that Yahweh would give him and this land to him forever for him and his descendants. That numerous amount of descendants that he believed in Genesis 15, that those promises together, not just one promise, those promises is a part of him believing in those promises, is just momentary justification, not forever eternal justification, because Abraham could change his mind and rebel and serve false gods and reject Yahweh, deny Yahweh. Yahweh will deny him, right? 1 Timothy 2:12, 2 Timothy 2:12, excuse me. But that's not the case with Abraham. He was faithful unto death, and he was justified for believing Yahweh's promises to him and walking in faith towards those promises by the prescribed obedience for a man of faith, which was to do the commandments of God. And we see that those commandments were alive and well. Let's just go to the Abimelech situation. Okay. So he takes her in to be his wife, even though Abraham knew that's pretty much what's going to happen because you're so beautiful. And the dream in the middle of the night that Abimelech had not gone near Sarah. So he replied, Lord, would you destroy a nation even though it's innocent? Now, this is one night, however, God came to Abimelech in a dream and told him, you are as good as dead because of the woman you have taken, for she's a married woman. And Abimelech is like, hey, you wouldn't destroy a nation even though it's innocent. I mean, didn't we just have this conversation with Abraham in Genesis 18? As Abraham is still talking to one of the angels that stayed behind, and the other two went down to Sodom and Gomorrah. And he's like, oh, you're going to destroy a nation if there's 50 righteous men in it? And the response through the angel from Yahweh was, no, not if there's 50, I would not destroy it. And then he like whittles him down to like 10 and 5, right? So in the same way, the response from Abimelech to Yahweh speaking to him in a dream is, would you destroy a nation even though it's innocent? Because what's on the line here is the nation is going to be destroyed. You're as good as dead because the woman you've taken, for she's a married woman. Now, what we see later, as unfolded later in this, is that all the wombs in his court were closed. And so this was kind of like the curse that was brought upon them, because he had taken in a married woman with intent to make him one of his wives, but yet didn't know that she was already married to a prophet. And then this is the reply, because he's saying, I innocently did this. I did not know. And he even says, didn't Abraham tell me she's my sister? And she herself said, he's my brother. I have done this in the integrity of my heart and the innocence of my hands. But what's about to happen here? Yahweh's about to punish a man for taking another man's wife, and that would be considered adultery. And the furthering consequence is that this sin against Yahweh is the same sin as we see listed out at Mount Sinai. It's the same, it's the exact same concepts. But God is even already enforcing this on someone that is Abimelech, who's, if he's the king of Egypt here, then more than likely he's a descendant of Mitzrayim, and he's not a descendant of Shem. He's not in the lineage of Noah down to Abraham through Shem, but he's in the lineage of Noah through Ham and Mitzrayim. He's the king of Egypt. That's at least what's assumed, right? But the point is, there's no Mount Sinai yet. We're hundreds of years away from Mount Sinai. But we already have the Father. What have we seen so far in Abraham's life? He's a priest doing sacrifices just like we're announced and prescribed in Leviticus. He's paying a tenth to a priest above him. That's I can't remember the exact verse right now. Is it Numbers 21? Is it Numbers 18 where it talks about the priests who must pay their tithes to the high priests? Abraham's already a priest and he's paying a tithe to a high priest in Genesis 14. That's not even surface level Torah. That's deep Torah. Okay. Now we've got capital punishment. God's instructions for capital punishment happening from divine justice. This isn't just men saying, you know what, this is a good idea that we hold people accountable for adultery. No, this is Yahweh holding people accountable for adultery here, saying you would sin against me, but you did this with a clear conscience. You didn't know, and you didn't touch her, so it's all good. But hey, just thought I'd let you know, I'm still God in heaven. Right? So what an interesting concept, right? Why was this even told to us? Why is Genesis 20 even reviewing any of this stuff for us? Because in this case, what are we supposed to walk away thinking that Abraham and Sarah were deceptive? Abraham feared, just like we see with, about 100 years later with Jacob and the inhabitants of Shechem, with the men of Shechem had a reputation for taking wives and killing their husbands. So they were going to kidnap Dinah. They were also had plans to take Rebecca and Leah and Rachel. Because this was what they were doing with lots of people in the area. They were predatorial. Okay. So then, of course, who gets vindicated? Simeon and Levi get vindicated for taking vengeance on Shechem. But that was Yahweh emboldening Levi and Simeon to enact justice according to his law for kidnapping, which is the death penalty also. So now we have Yahweh about to enact divine justice on someone outside of quote unquote Israel. Israel's not even born yet. That's Jacob. And most people just teach this idea that, oh, only Abraham was a descendant of Noah through Shem that was in the faith, and everybody else was just heathens. And Abraham was the only one that was just singled out and called out. No, guys, we just read in Genesis 14, there's an entire priesthood already. Who are these other men of this priesthood? It's an entire priesthood in Salem. So in chapter 20, we have the king of Egypt who's referring to Yahweh as the Lord. Not so, my Lord. Would you destroy a nation? I did this integrity of my heart. He's making this case with respect and calling this person Lord. God's appearing to him in a dream. Could have been an angel speaking to him in a dream or a vision. God said to Abimelech in the dream, yes, I know that you did this with clear conscience, so I've kept you from sinning against me. That's why I did not let you touch her. Now return the man's wife, for he's a prophet. He'll pray for you and you will live. Because there was a curse on their house that was causing sickness. But if you do not restore her, be aware that you will surely die, you and all who belong to you. Early the next morning, Abimelech got up and summoned all of his servants. When he described to them all that had happened, the men were terrified, rightly so. Then Abimelech called Abraham and asked, what have you done to us? How have I sinned against you that you have brought such tremendous guilt upon me and my kingdom? So this is not a good look for Abraham, but at the same time, why are we told this? Or is the narrative even a thought? Is the narrative even a thought of, wait a minute, I thought the law was just for them Jews at Sinai. No, the narrative we're reading right here is that it is assumed and understood that God's law applies to all mankind, all the descendants from Noah that got off that boat. They're all just like Noah who followed God's law. That's why he's called righteous in Genesis 6:8. Everyone, he was the one that taught them righteousness, Jubilees chapter 7. But then some rebelled. And they didn't just all rebel at once, they systematically rebelled. Obviously, we got the Tower of Babel happening in the background of this stuff also. Or at least before, after chapter 11, leading, and then that's why we have all these different nations happening by the time we get to chapter 14. So what I'm saying is, though, there's a there's an interesting aspect of this, is that Yahweh is not just sitting idle in heaven saying, oh man, they're doing it again. They're all abandoning my covenant once again. They're all leaving me. Well, will I find any faith upon the earth? No, he's not saying that. He's got people, and they're spreading the good news. And at other points, Yahweh's just appearing to kings through dreams and enforcing his law, not Egyptian law, not Babylonian law, not law of Hammurabi, but he's enforcing his divine law onto other kings with the expectation that you obey it, or else you die. How is that not the same thing Jonah did with the Assyrian king, who then repented and respected Yahweh, and judgment was spared for 100 years on Assyria? This is super, super relevant when we read Genesis to understand Yahweh's law is forever. It's always been around. It is the expectation of him on all peoples. Let's go to Genesis chapter 36. Let's give you some outside context, if you will, okay? Chapter 36 in Genesis. The kings of Edom, okay? These are the kings of Edom, right? What do we know? Edom is, you have Esau, and then you have Jacob. These are grandchildren of Abraham. Okay. Bela, the son of Beor, reigned in Edom. These are the kings who reigned in the land of Esau, the land of Edom. That's Mount Seir, like we just read from the Genesis Apocryphon that tells the patriarchs. That's the land of Esau, okay, which was actually given to him by covenant before any king reigned over the Israelites. So this is actually going to be starting off during the days of Abraham. And it mentions Beor reigned in Edom. The name of his city was Dinhabah. When Bela died, Jobab, the son of Zerah from Basra, reigned in his place. Guys, this is Job. Okay? And if you put together the timeline, if you will, this guy is a fifth generation down from Abraham. You had Abraham, Isaac, Esau, Bela, and Jobab. Now, that's just assuming that Jobab is actually a descendant of Bela to the next generation. He could have already been born and been in the same generation of Bela and therefore be fourth generation descendant directly under Esau and Jacob. I'm just going above and beyond to say, all right, let's give it a little more slack, and we'll just even call him the fifth generation descendant of Abraham. Okay. Now remember, Abraham lived 76 years after Jacob was born. It's a long time. Okay. Jacob started having children. So Abraham's already dead, by the way. I'm just saying Jacob started having children around age 62, I believe, or 60, if I can get my math right from the book of Jubilees and from Genesis when you add them together. So that still leaves about 16 years for Abraham to still be alive when how did I say this? No, I said that wrong. Isaac took a wife and had Jacob around 60 years old. So that leaves about 16 years for Abraham to still be alive while Jacob was alive. Okay. Now, Jacob, I don't think had his children till much later, but the point is Esau, we don't know exactly when he started having children. It doesn't tell us, the exact years as it does with Jacob and everything. But the point is, Jobab is very, very close to Abraham's lifespan, if not a small overlap, as Jobab was a child. If not that, then soon after Abraham died, Jobab has shown up. So this is similar generations, and it's before Mount Sinai. This is Job from the book of Job. Okay. And for everyone watching that's new to the channel, I'll prove it to you real quick. Okay. So we just read that we'll go to the last chapter of the book of Job, and we have to go to the Septuagint, and it tells you directly in verse 17, 42:17, the very last chapter of the Septuagint. It actually gives you the fullness of Job's life, whereas the Masoretic doesn't have all of it. The Masoretic just said Job died, but this is the fullness in the Septuagint about Job. It explains who he was and where he was from. Okay. He was old man full of days. It's written, he will rise again with those whom the Lord raises up. So even it's explaining in the book of Job, in the Septuagint, that Job is expected in the resurrection at the end of days, at the consummation of the ages, the second coming of Christ. Job also has the same faith. He's an Edomite. The man is described in the Syriac book as the land of the land of Asis. That's also in the Masoretic. The borders of Edom, Arabia, and his name was Jobab. Right there. So it gives you a direct correlation in Genesis 36. And he has the same his father Zer, mother Basora. That's the same thing we see in the Masoretic text in Genesis 36. Okay. So we have a direct correlation in the same generation as Isaac, still alive, and Jacob still alive. You have Job is alive, doing the commandments of God. Why is this important? Why does this matter? Because we're talking about how the commandments of God are relevant and they're still being obeyed by different nations, even outside of Abraham's lifespan, by other people. So if we go to, let's go to Job 34 and stay in the Septuagint because it's fascinating. It gives you more detail. Or is it actually, it's actually 27. No, it is. Here it is. Job 34, 26 and 27. It says, speaking about the Lord looks down upon all men. He comprehends unsearchable things, glorious also and excellent things without number. Who discovers their works, rhetorical, and will bring night about upon them, that they should be brought low? And he, that's the Lord, quite destroys the ungodly, for they are seen before him. Because they, the ungodly, turned aside from the law of God and did not regard his ordinances. This is Job. This is outside of the bloodline of Israel, outside of the bloodline of Abraham. Well, no, it's not. It's in the bloodline of Abraham. It's outside of the bloodline of Israel. Israel is a contemporary with Job and alive right now. But yet he's saying that the nations have turned away from the law of God. In fact, I don't even know if this is Job speaking. One second. No, this is Elias. This is one of Job's Arabian kings who's his friend. This is not even Job. This is another dude talking about how godless kings and godless men of other nations have turned away from the law of God. So some people think with the descendants of Arabia that's a direct lineage from Ishmael. So, and this is the point of going over the genealogy of Job. It seems as if I think his mother was an Ishmaelite and his father was Zer. And so that's why Genesis 36 lists him in the king's list of Edom, with his father being Zer. And I think his mother was the Ishmaelite from Arabia. But the point is, okay, so we're talking now 50 miles south of Jerusalem, 50 miles south of Hebron, around Mount Seir, and the territories where the Edomite kings lived in close conjunction with the descendants of Ishmael in Arabia. Okay, and how they also were aware of the law of God and its ordinances. Do you guys know that things like Passover is called an ordinance? So then this is where we get to Genesis. And when we get to Genesis, we start to see, oh, wait a minute. Did Abraham know about ordinances? And he did. Okay. This is the same promise being given to Isaac, and Yahweh follows it up with, oh, by the way, this is the same thing I offered to your father Abraham because he was so faithful. So Yahweh says to Isaac, I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky. I will give them all these lands, and through your offspring all nations of the earth will be blessed. Guys, this is the gospel. This is the gospel. Kingdom come, all nations will be blessed. How does it happen? Through Christ the Messiah, the seed, the one that's promised to Isaac. Because Abraham listened to my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. So if you go into the Hebrew in this in verse 5, kept my charge. Is it mismarti? Is the priesthood, my commandments, my statutes. This is the one for ordinances. Statutes, ordinances, statutory ordinance. Okay. And those ordinances, by the way, are the included in those ordinances are the feasts of God. Let me go to the live chat real quick, and I may have had some questions. Just trying to give you guys some historical context to understand. It's not even that Job is considered a righteous man who's literally a contemporary with Isaac right after Abraham's death. It's not even the fact that he's considered a righteous man before God, and Satan wants to test him and get him to be unrighteous, just like he does with Abraham. It's the point where Job and his buddies who show up are all having this conversation about sinning against Yahweh and how ungodly men have turned away from Yahweh's law and his ordinances. Well, that makes perfect sense when we see Jacob also doing the law in Genesis chapter 30. Jacob is doing the tithe. Jubilees chapter 32, Jacob is filling the hands of Levi with the priestly vestment. He knew about the priesthood. Levi is receiving the call of priesthood, as we see later repeated in Malachi 2. You don't have a priesthood without a law. Genesis 14, the Melchizedek priesthood is in operation, doing a law. Abraham comes forward to bring tithe to a higher priest than he is, which is part of law, God's law. That's explained to us throughout the rest of the Old Testament. Job and his friends, outside of Hebron, away from Salem, they're not a part of the priesthood in Salem. Job and his friends are talking about God's law and how people will turn away from it. We haven't had anyone call in, so I guess no one disagrees. So we'll never hear this again, huh? We'll never hear anyone say, "Oh, that was a different law. That wasn't the same as Mount Sinai. It was a different covenant." We're never going to hear again the suzerain vassal term, right? The suzerain vassal covenant. We're never going to hear people bring that up and say, "Oh, that was different. It was just a type of special kingly covenant that they were making with Yahweh, and it was just for them and nobody else." And we won't hear that anymore, right? Because everyone who's listening agrees. No one's going to call in and ask questions or say you disagree and tell me why. It's so funny. Whenever I do these call-in shows, people disagree with me. They rarely want to call in. I'll be nice to you. I'm not going to treat you badly. I'll just have an answer ready for you. So you're welcome to call in. Seeking the Kingdom's asking, do you think Abraham was a Christian? Did he have any ideas about Messiah? Hebrews seem to focus on his looking forward to the city and resurrection. Well, obviously, I think you know that there's a loose, you're using a term that, comes from Latin, the Christos, follower of Christ. So you wouldn't use that term, obviously, but Abraham, John chapter 8, Jesus says, Abraham saw my day and rejoiced. I believe that is actually a part of another Old Testament apocryphal book that is acknowledged in the Greek Orthodox list of the development of their canon in the 7th century. Is called the Apocalypse of Abraham, to where it tries to tell you during that Genesis 15 moment where he falls asleep. While he falls asleep, it says he goes into a trance or the dreamlike state of a vision, which is, I think, why you see a lot of the terminology of the word dream used in the Masoretic, because it's assumed it was not just a normal dream, but it was a actual type of like a vision from God where someone was speaking to him and explaining to him significant things from the Almighty. And the Apocalypse of Abraham describes during that moment in Genesis 15, while he's got the altar set up and ready, and then he falls asleep, that was when he saw the kingdom come, the consummation of the ages, the second coming of Christ, how Christ returns in the full measure and power of the Father of the Almighty to destroy the wicked and to establish peace on the earth and to resurrect the saints. And he sees all this in the vision in the Apocalypse of Abraham. And I think that's what Yeshua was referring to, that Abraham saw my day and was glad. He rejoiced. So again, even if the Apocalypse of Abraham is contested and people think it's spurious and they don't think, well, even though it was considered as a part of one of the apocryphal texts that they did know about in the early church, but if you don't like it, okay, that's fine, because in the book of Enoch, which Jubilees directly tells you Abraham had the book of Enoch in his possession, it talks about Christ everywhere. So I think he did know about Christ. He didn't call him Christ. He didn't use that later Latin term. Latin hadn't even been, to my understanding, Latin wasn't even a language yet until like the 4th century BC. But yes, he knew about Christ and believed that he would be the elect one of the Almighty that would be sent to, enact and establish all these promises of the covenant. Hey, Dirt Track, I appreciate you, man. Thank you for the compliment. Emmanuel, Sean, you should talk more about fasting and encourage Christians to fast. Well, so you're saying that you fast 3 days a year? Okay. Well, I would encourage Christians to fast. And, it's one of those deals where I mean, I can tell you the benefits of it, that you should do it, but I don't know if I would, like, I'm not going to set, there's no prescription in the Bible for when and how often you should fast. So I'm not going to tell people to do that. They're going to have to grow into that upon their own conviction. I would suggest trying to start fasting at some point in your life for your prayer life and for your enhanced discipline, so that you can actually resist temptation easier, because it is helpful to you to build up your internal discipline. Okay. And you could start with once a week, even. You could do it once a week. You don't have to just do it 3 days a year. But I mean, again, it depends on the person. I'm not handing out an actual prescription right now. Even in the Gospels, when Christ said, when you fast, but he never actually prescribed how to fast, how often to fast, all that kind of stuff. But it was very common that early Christians in the early first century, they fasted like at least once a week, if not more, because they were disciplining their bodies to be able to resist temptation. Seeking the kingdom, no, the angel of the Lord is not always Michael, as we see in Luke chapter 1. It's Gabriel at that point. So again, they're just angels of the presence. And this is what Jubilees chapter 2, verses 1 and 2 explains, that they were a part of the two great classes of angels that were made on day one. The angels of the presence were made. And Michael and Gabriel fall into that classification as being called the angel of the presence. And I think it's a term that refers to them being the archangels, being the top of the angelic priesthood, the highest authority within that classification. Brenda, yes, I believe that the Melchizedek is an order of righteous rulers. So that's technically what the word means. Okay, Zedek means righteousness, and a Melchi is a ruler or a king. So this would be a king of righteousness, or a righteous ruler. And it was often in a well-known concept in the ancient world that the king of a nation was also the high priest of that nation to the gods that they served in that nation. This is a common thing all the way into the days of the Romans in the 3rd century AD. So this is we talked about this in our Christmas series, where one of the priests of Elikabala, the Syrian sun god, he's 14 years old, and he's the high priest of this Syrian sun god named Elikabala, and he's made the Roman emperor. And he also then adopts his own name after that god, Elagabalus. And he only rules for 4 years as emperor of Rome before there's a mutiny and someone kills him. But he basically was a high priest and emperor. So he was already one of the top dog rulers of the Syrian territory under the Roman Empire. But then it was like a kind of a weird coup in the Senate, and he was actually made the Roman emperor for 4 years. And then he wanted to bring his god, whom he was already a high priest to, and replace Jupiter out of the Roman pantheon. And that caused him to get killed, basically. But the point is, that was very common in the ancient world for the top leader of a nation to be the king and the high priest of that nation, because you were the ultimate representative on behalf of those people to the gods you served. Now, within there's still an order of priesthood. Okay, so this is why I mentioned quickly, as I was breaking down the Tales of Patriarchs, Genesis 14, Jubilees, those other concepts that have that corresponding contextual relevancy to the time period of Abraham in Genesis 14, that the Melchizedeks, as mentioned in Jubilees 13, says that there's more than one priest there. It was a priesthood. This is what the Melchizedek order is, the order of Melchizedek. Just like the Levitical order was not just one priest, it was a group that trained successors. In the same way, the order of Melchizedek, they had a top dog high priest, and then there's lesser priests, and all of it trained new priests. That was the idea. So yes, it's an order. And Abraham would have been a part of that order. Okay. Now, I don't know all the bylaws. I don't know the the induction ceremony. I don't know any other details. I just know that it's an order. So that means there's more than one. And that also would mean that would be pretty convenient if the other priests were also rulers of their people and their lands. So this would make a lot of sense to why we see in the book of Job, who's also going to be a Melchizedek, because he was also a king and a judge and a priest over his people, as the book of Job tells us, that other kings of Arabia would show up to him and confront him about their suspicion that he sinned against Yahweh, and that's why he was facing all this these curses. So Melchizedek's getting together to hold each other accountable, kind of concept. Okay. KG Bear, Hebrews 11 tells us that Abraham, the thought process in his mind in Genesis 22 is that he believed the promise so strongly that he knew that Yahweh would just resurrect Isaac if he actually went through with it. So that in order to make the promise fulfilled. So like he was kind of assuming resurrection would happen if he went through with it. Yeah, seeking the kingdom. So the Hebrew 7 is addressing a comparison between the Levitical order versus the Melchizedek order. The Levitical order had a father and mother genealogical requirement. Okay, so you could not be brought up in the order of Levites of priesthood unless your parents were Levites. And specifically, as it got down further on, unless a specific family within the Levites, especially for the high priesthood. But that requirement is not a part of the Melchizedek requirement. There is no stated definition for the requirement within the Melchizedeks, but what I can glean from the scriptures is it's supposed to be according to the actual definition of the word Melchizedek, which means you must be a ruler and you must be righteous. You must be a righteous ruler, and you can be a part of the Melchizedek order. You're an unrighteous ruler, you can't get in. You see what I mean? You could be a righteous ruler. So Yahweh is training up shepherds over people groups. He needs people that knows his law and that has integrity to follow it in righteousness. That's the Melchizedek order, righteous rulers over the people, training up positive shepherds. So this is why Hebrews 7 has explained to you that since Christ was from the tribe of Judah, of whom there is no mention of serving at the altar, it's okay, because that's why the prophecies about Christ, as chapter 7 repeats, chapter 8 repeats, chapter 5 has already told you. It's even in chapter 6 as well. It repeats the Psalm 110, 1 through 4, that the prophecy of Christ was that he would be in the order of Melchizedek anyway. So it's okay that he's not a Levite. That's all it's doing. It's just comparing the two requirements for the two different orders. One order had a genealogical requirement, the other one didn't. Going through some more here. Okay, make sure your questions are so I can see them. Put them in caps. Do something. Make sure I can see it. Scotty's asking, maybe off topic, but I think about how Yahweh has not given me a purpose for ministry. I see the patriarchs, and sometimes I feel jealous of their lot in life. Can you speak on that at all? Yeah, brother. What are you talking about, brother? If you got a family, that's a massive purpose in ministry right there. It's all of our first ministries. And even if you're not married, you have a family, right? Your father, your mother, your brothers and sisters, those is part of your first and foremost ministry. Now, once you cleave to your wife and you guys become one, you start your own family, that then becomes your priority in your first ministry. But the ministry that you also have as an ambassador of Christ is like Paul talks about, it's the priestly ministerial office of teaching the gospel of the kingdom and the word of Christ to those around you. So Christ has given all of us as his disciples, Matthew 28:19, he's given all of us a ministry, brother. We should go out to the nations and preach all that he commanded. Okay? So look, you may not be in a place where you do it as often as I get to do it. That doesn't mean it's not a ministry. Before I did this, do you think I was silent about my faith? No, I was not. No, I was not. I I talked, like, sometimes people didn't like me talking about my faith and about Christ and about what I believed and about how much I should love studying the Bible. And some people did. I had certain jobs where they loved me talking about it because they were fellow believers too, and others where they didn't like me talking about it. I talked to strangers about it. Before I do what you see me do now, I was already doing this to everyone I met all the time as much as I could get away with it. So that is a part of your ministry. It can be, yeah. Now, if there's a specific thing, that just ask. Father says we have because we don't have because we don't ask. If you want to go into something specific, I prayed for that a long time ago, and it took quite some time for him to keep, pruning my bonsai tree and making sure I was ready for presentation, so to speak. Making sure I was trained up properly so that I could get out here and knew what I was talking about. Have the fortitude to say it with conviction and boldness, as well as be able to withstand some darts from time to time, right? We see me get these debates, these bad discussions, being able to hold my tongue and not, return evil for evil or curse those who curse me. Instead, I want to bless those. Now, it took time for me to build into that position, right? And so I wanted to, I didn't, I've talked about this probably just one other time on the channel, but I wanted to be talking about God's word for a living 15 years ago. But I just never thought it could even be a reality. That was before YouTube podcasting was even an option, really. I knew I didn't want to be a part of an actual minister, like within a certain ordination at a church, because I was seeing so many issues with the modern church in the area that I was in. Okay. I'm not saying all churches are bad. I was just seeing so many issues with like the lack of understanding about the Bible in general. You guys have heard me tell this story 100 times, right? I used to make appointments with pastors during the week and sit and ask them Bible questions. And many of them didn't have answers from the questions I would have. Right. So that did not encouraged me to actually want to go get into that system and get ordinated into that denomination as one of their pastors and depend on and have to tote the line for what they believed and what they thought, because I was like, man, it's like they're so limited in what they understand about this book, and it comes across in how they're holding church. It's like not all churches are like this, but in my experience, I was running into people that were more concerned with making either a welcome environment or the altar call. They were more concerned with those aspects of the church service and the church community as a building up the community, versus the people in the pews actually knowing the word of God for competency in their discipleship. Okay. So while I'm simultaneously fascinated with God's word, can't stop studying it and praying, man, God, I'd love to be in a position where I could just like study the Bible all day, talk about the Bible, and somehow like, is that even a job? That's not even a job, right? I didn't know that is a job, by the way. It's called being a teacher and a scribe. Like, it's actually in the book of Acts. They literally set aside money so that people could be teachers and study the word all day and be competent in what they were doing for the growing population of Christians. I didn't understand at the time that that is an actual function of office within the church, but it's just not glorified in the modern church. They're too busy with the marketing team. They're too busy with the social media marketing team. They're too busy with the AV and sound team. Make sure that fog machine's working properly. Make sure that the multimedia system is being not only broadcasted here, but to their 15 satellite campuses in real time. Right. So I just thought I'm just going to be a closet Bible nerd. I'll never be able to actually, you know, do this full time as a ministry, because seems to be extremely niche, dream that I had. But God, Yahweh made it a reality, brother. He can do it for you. Whatever calling, gifting, or he has for you, he can do it for you just the same. I'm literally living proof of, the most unlikely reality coming true for me when it comes to like being a Bible nerd and studying the word and just having a blast talking about it all the time, and hopefully encouraging you guys that are listening. He can do it for you, brother. Just ask him to lead you and guide you specifically in that. Hey, awesome. Ramanu 22. Thanks for watching from New Zealand, brother. That's great. Hopefully you guys I'm just happy to see people from all over the world, man. It's amazing. Yeah, seeking the kingdom. I like I've said before, the Trinitarians definitely don't claim me because I don't from the homoousius, the Unitarians. I think they tolerate me. I don't think that they have anything bad to say about me, but I think I'm definitely in the minority because I do believe that Christ pre-existed. So I don't really label myself as Unitarian. I'm definitely not oneness. And so, because I do believe that Christ pre-existed, but I don't think that just because he pre-existed, it has all these philosophic entailments that the Trinitarian homoousius applies to it. But I do believe in the incarnation. I just don't think it has great metaphysical entailments to it. I think that 1 Corinthians 15 tells us what type of incarnation it was. Fits with y'all. No, I said Isaac and Job are contemporaries. And if I was speaking fast and misspoke, I meant to say Isaac and Job were contemporaries, according to how I'm seeing the genealogical breakdown, which also means specifically Jacob, because Isaac was alive for a long time after Jacob was born. So basically Isaac and Jacob would be contemporaries with Job, but Abraham, I think, just died before Job was born. Okay, guys. Looking for some more questions in here. Yeah, there's a lot of people watching right now that may not agree with what we're talking about. Maybe it's the first time they've heard any of this stuff that we just talked about tonight with Abraham and his faith and his life and the contemporaries and the context of his life. And maybe they don't even know how to process a question for it right now. But it's so funny because whenever I step onto the internet outside of my channel, so many people that want to come at me angry with what I say about God's laws being eternal, about the patriarchs before Moses were following the same law, just with less specificity as far as like how they were going into the land and specifically to obey the law, but the law was already expected of all nations, like I just read to you from Job. Like we see affirmed later in Ecclesiastes 12:13. Like Paul even repeats in Romans 2, 7 through 16. All nations will be judged by the same law. It's always been it's God's behavior. It's not some arbitrary standard he made up. It's God's behavior, and that's he wants all of us to follow his behavior, and those who don't will be judged by whether we do or not. So this is why, Revelation 22:13, he's going to come back and reward everyone according to their deeds. Sarah, how can this gentleman, how can he do studies on Job and Abraham and still be antinomian? So anyway, that's why we have the title. That's why we have the thumbnail. That's why we have, like, we're told in Galatians 3:7 that we are of the faith of Abraham. We're sons of God, but we're sons of Abraham by this faith that we have in Christ Jesus. It's the same faith. Same faith, guys. Same commandments, same faith. The application of the commandments may be very specific to some of the time period within the descendants of Israel who came out of Egypt, went into the land and had to do warfare and establish things. But all the general principles of atonement, thanksgiving and joy to God, the ordinances, the Sabbath, all of those things, it's the same law. It's the same law, guys. Brandon, I don't know what you're talking about. What sons? What do you mean? Seeking the kingdom. He didn't wait till Sinai to start giving laws. He gave them already. They're given through prophets. It's an understanding. What? Check this out. I had this on screen earlier. Okay, it's. I mean, if we're going super old school, way before, from way before Mount Sinai. Check this out. I read this earlier. I read it fast. Okay, so I'll read it again. Look, so this is in the Tales of the Patriarchs found amongst the Dead Sea Scrolls. It's also called the Genesis Apocryphon in the Dead Sea Scrolls. This is Abraham. Okay. And this is basically from chapter 13. This is, again, this stuff is not written chronological order, but this is a short summary of chapter 13 up to chapter 20. Right? So the Egyptians in the court of the Pharaoh of Zoan, he had been there for 5 years. Right? So this is when Sarah, she became scared, did not want to go to Zoan for fear of being seen. 5 years later, counselors of Egyptian's court came, and the advisors of Pharaoh of Zoan came, having heard the words of my wife. They brought gifts and requested knowledge from me that I read to them the book of the words of Enoch. So what do the words of Enoch have? A reprimand against lawlessness. Now, here's the interesting part. We don't actually know the fullness of the scrolls of Enoch that Abraham would have had, because what we have left in modernity to us are fragments of 6 different scrolls, of which some of them are actually the writings of Noah. So we don't actually have the fullness of what he has, but even within what we have left over, there's a ton of God's law, God's righteousness, transgressors of that law. There's a ton of that in there. There's wisdom in there. But it's interesting that this is what this claims, that the Genesis 20 time period, that the king, the advisors of Pharaoh, okay, not just Pharaoh, the advisors, counselors of the Egyptian court, they want wisdom, they want knowledge from Abraham, and he reads them the words of Enoch. This, guys, I think the original scrolls of Enoch, I think, was the first Bible, if you will, the first collection of writings from prophets of Yahweh, with how the creation was made, what Yahweh expects of you, the promises of future judgments, promises of the coming of the Son of Man. This is why the companion of First Enoch that we see in the Testament of the 12 Patriarchs, not the tale of the 12 Patriarchs, but another book that was included in the Armenian canon, Testament of 12 Patriarchs, in 9 different places, it says, oh, and I learned this in the book of Enoch. And then goes on to start talking about prophecies and wisdom and commandment keeping and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, I don't think that there was a specific beginning point at Mount Sinai where God was like, okay, you guys have been just trying to do your best to figure it out from Adam until now, and now I'm going to go ahead and just give you my law. No, it was already given through the prophets, the same way Yahweh always does it. There was just more specificity, and this is why, if you go into the word add in Galatians 3:19, is in the Greek, it's a word that's more about either added as if it, not as if it didn't exist before, but added as in if it's repeated. So it's very interesting, because the people in bondage and in slavery in Egypt had forgotten his ways. They need to be retaught. This is why they were so full of the idols of Egypt. They needed to be retaught. And this is one of the practices, if you will, of the enemy, is to oppress you through the government, spiritually, physically, so that you forget his ways. And this had happened to the 12 tribes in Goshen throughout the years of their oppression. So Yahweh brings them out from the cries of the righteous. He brings them out, redeems them from the hand of the oppressor, teaches them his wisdom again, puts them in a place of relationship to where a protection to where they can flourish in their relationship with him. And he says in Deuteronomy 30:15-20, he did this because of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They were so faithful. Same laws, same covenant. It is crazy, brother. We're talking obviously First Enoch, Jubilees, Genesis Apocryphon, Testament of the 12 Patriarchs. I already said Jubilees, I think. Tales of the Patriarchs, another one. Lovingly, I would say Christ, Peter, and Jude, personally. Christ is teaching stuff directly from Enoch. Peter's mentioning things only found in Enoch and teaching directly from Enoch. And Jude is quoting Enoch. I don't think it's crazy. I think your disbelief is the same amazement and wonderment of disbelief that Tertullian has in his book Apologeticum, where he's talking about it. It is interesting that the Jews, that some of the Christians are rejecting the scriptures of First Enoch because maybe they, like the Jews, don't believe angels can marry or could have procreated. I'm paraphrasing, but that was his Tertullian, the 2nd century. Right? We're talking like 170 AD. That was also his confusion concerning the book of Enoch, which he called sacred scripture. And he even starts, hypothesizing, I'm wondering if it's because they don't think it was accurately transmitted through the Holy Spirit. And then he says, well, why? But it's not implausible, just as we know all the scriptures we have today were restored by Ezra. That's in the 5th century BC. He then says, why is it so hard to believe that the writings of Enoch were accurately preserved through the flood through Noah? And even if they were lost, since we already have the precedent that Ezra restored all the scriptures from the Holy Spirit, why couldn't Noah do the same thing with the writings of Enoch? So he's making a very logical and biblically, a historical case for a precedent for how we have our scriptures today through the restoration from the high priest Ezra, to make a case for what he said is clearly scripture and with First Enoch. And it is wild that there's so many, and that's just, if you just look in the 12 different writings that comprise the testament of the 12 patriarchs that was in the Armenian canon. I think it's the Testament of Dan. There's like 5 different times in the Testament of Levi. It's in the Testament, I believe, of Judah, and I also want to say Simeon, where it mentions Enoch as well. Anyway, it's like 9 different times that of the different sons of Jacob, they all say they learned this from the writings of Enoch. So they all had it. This is what Jubilees 44 directly tells you, that Jacob had the words of Noah and Enoch in his possession when he went down into Goshen, 75 in all. That means they would have had it when they came out of, that's a strong possibility. They would have still had it when they came out of Egypt, out of Goshen, and are at Mount Sinai. They would have still had it. This is why we've said this before so many times, and I can't seem to get people to really acknowledge this, because nobody wants to. Everyone wants to keep holding on to the Jewish interpretation of Scripture. People don't want to acknowledge what's right in our faces here. And if we go to Exodus 18, we're at the base of Mount Sinai, and Moses is reading from the commandments of God. Well, I thought they weren't given until chapter 20. Look at this. Took a seat, stood around. He's judging people. They have a dispute. Whenever they have a dispute, it's brought to me to judge between one man and another, and I make known to them the statutes and laws of God. This is when Jethro shows up before chapter 19 and 20, before Yahweh smoke and fire and sets on the top of Mount Sinai. Like he's already teaching people directly from the statutes and laws of God. These would be the same ones that Abraham knew about. Moses, I mean, literally, there's priests here. The Levites are already priests by this point. I know that's another argument that modern Christianity and Judaism likes to say, well, there weren't any Levites until the golden calf. That's just false, guys. It's just false. Malachi 2 tells you it's false. Levi was already made a priesthood in Jubilees 32, 100 plus years earlier from this moment, in Exodus 18. Levi has already been made a priest. The Levitical order has already started and is in succession while they're in Goshen. This is why by the time you get to Exodus 19, there's priests at the base of the mountain. This is not just all the firstborn of Israel. There's actual priests here. Look. Your priest needs a law. Moses is a priest. He's a Levite. He's teaching the laws and statutes of God. This is a job of the priesthood. We've got to get rid of Judaism's interpretations of the Bible and just read the Bible for what it says. Yeah, Brenda, it depends on which one you're talking about, right? So there's the general instruction of God versus, the Torah, which he calls his wisdom, which is the fullness of his word, okay? Versus the ordinance and statutes. The statute may be something more like a regulatory judgment or statute, depending on like, okay, so if someone, commits adultery, then the statute for that is that they should be killed, right? They should be stoned. The ordinances usually are in line with like the Sabbaths, the festivals, something that's prescribed to the people and how they should worship Yahweh. Okay, a new moon. The priesthood obviously would be a part of the ordinances as well, but then again, the word law can also just be the general instruction, but then there's also the concept of Torah, which can imply just in the context of all those other descriptions, there's also an instruction from Yahweh specific. Okay, so what's an example? So Yahweh tells you to go do something like in Joshua chapter 6 and 7, right? He tells all of Israel to have the priests lead the way, and then they're to blow the ram's horns and circle Jericho once a day for 7 days. And on the seventh day, they're to circle 7 times, right? And then blow the ram's horn and shout and praise, and the city fell down. That was not a regular command as far as the laws of God, but that was a specific instruction that also could be called Torah, depending on the context, right? And they are supposed to obey that as well. Hopefully that helps out. For whens you can tithe to a church if they're doing good work. Okay, if they're actually being the hands and feet of God, you can tithe to a church. Sure, yeah. You can tithe to a soup kitchen that's not affiliated with a church. Remember the ancient concept for the tithe. We're not in that same place today. So now we fall into the concept of taking our tithe and trying to find an appropriate place for it amongst the people. A Deuteronomy 15 type of give of your excess to the poor. Okay, so this is where, because we don't have a temple to present our actual yearly or tri-yearly tithes to which they would then disperse it to the poor, the widows, and the orphans, and the stranger, those who are in need, and to themselves. So we're not technically paying for a priesthood, but yet those who do minister the gospel, and which are typically modern day pastors at churches, they can make their living from the gospel. This is 1 Corinthians chapter 9. Paul tries to go over this for us. as well as many of these modern churches do have outreach to the community where they're trying to help people that are in need and they need resources. And that is a perfect biblical appropriation for your tithe or your alms. That is how it goes to those in need. Okay. All right, guys. I don't see anybody calling in. I don't see any more questions. I appreciate you being here. If you like what we're doing, if you want to support us, video description below, check out our Patreon. Check out, if you want to be a member. Now, I just want to explain something, guys. YouTube membership does not let me do what Patreon lets me do. I'm sorry. That's the hard reality of it. I've tried to get around it. I've tried to upload certain videos just for members on YouTube and they reject them. Okay. So on Patreon, it's the same concept of support like YouTube. It's like a monthly concept. You can sign up at different tiers. But on Patreon, we're uploading I'm reviewing movies and TV shows and things like that with my commentary and stuff. And so I can't upload those to YouTube. It rejects them because of the copyright. It's too lengthy of me watching copyrighted material. But Patreon does let me do that. Okay. Why? Because Patreon does not run advertisements on my videos. So YouTube does, and because of copyright law and conflict, they can't allow me to watch a whole bunch of copyrighted stuff while they're making money on it and running ads on it. Patreon, none of that applies. I can just upload, like I just uploaded a whole movie that I did a review on Patreon. So the point is, these are perks for people that want to support us, that want to come alongside us. You like what we're doing, think it's valuable and beneficial. You want to see us reach more people. This is how you can walk alongside of us and do that with us and support us. There's a variety of ways in the video description below. If you don't want to actually do local memberships, you just do a one-time concept. There's options for that in the video description as well. We're not priests. We're not Levites. This is not a tithe. This is simply just a love offering. You like what we're doing. You want to see us keep going. It's up to you. If God puts it on your heart, otherwise just comment, put a like on this video. That also helps. Okay. Thank you guys. I appreciate everything all the encouragement that you give us, all the interaction, and we hope this is a blessing, and we'll see you next time.
Slow down and return to what truly restores. Our Sabbath Rest blend was created for all to enjoy, a comforting blend of organic herbs traditionally used to calm restlessness and invite deep, peaceful rest. Perfect before bed or while observing the day of rest with the Most High. The Tree of Life blend draws from organic natural herbs, thoughtfully crafted to support balance and renewal. Best enjoyed a few times each week with a touch of organic raw honey. 2 blends that are crafted with care for a moment of peace in every cup.